back to that next year and whatnot, and back to some sort of normalcy. But today's talk, understanding offense, is one of my favorites because it's something that I commonly run into when we're testing organizations day in and day out. And we test, some of the largest organizations in the world, all the way to small to medium-sized businesses. And there's a struggle that is consistently across the board for pretty much every organization that we go and identify. And it's usually having an understanding around what their priorities should be. Around how you best defend your organization and how do you actually implement that based on the amount of resources and time and everything else that you have. And really, I think a lot of companies focus very heavily on technology implementation versus understanding visibility and understanding what attackers do from a post-exploitation perspective. And it's a very different mindset to have when you're going into and looking at how you should best secure your organization. So today we'll be talking about, hey, how do we start, looking at understanding our threat models, what adversaries are doing, how do we best prioritize those, and how do we build our security programs to be successful. Also be going through some, specific ways of getting around certain detection criteria and what attackers do and things to that effect. I have a couple demos here I'll go through as well from a technical perspective, but really appreciate you joining today. Just a brief introduction myself. My name is Dave Kennedy. I've been in the security industry now for, over 20 years, so it means I'm getting old. I started my career off working for the United States Marine Corps. I was in the intelligence community, focusing more on cyber warfare activities. And so I worked a lot with the NSA doing, a lot of different things and a lot of fun times. I had 2 tours in Iraq. I've been a chief security officer for a Fortune 1000 company for a number of years. I started my own 2 companies, TrustedSec and Binary Defense. We have over 300 folks worldwide, everybody from the UK, Norway, pretty much consistently all across the board. And just really trying to have the best of the best folks working with our customers, making them better from a security standpoint, day in and day out. I also co-authored the book, Metasploit, the Penetration Tester's Guide, which was a lot of fun writing for a number of years. I think it's actually back here somewhere. It was written in 11 different languages. So we had Chinese and a number of, different languages that it was converted into. So that was a lot of fun. And I write a lot of open source tools. So I wrote Magic Unicorn, the Social Engineer Toolkit, Pen Testers Framework, a number of other tools as well, focusing on either defense or exploitation or exploit research in a lot of cases. I'm on the news quite often, and I also helped out with the TV show Mr. Robot. I also just recently got a DeLorean, so I'm really excited about that. I've always wanted a DeLorean as a kid. And so over the next few months, I'm going to be working on kind of converting it to the Back to the Future 1, 2, and 3. I want to be able to do all 3 of them. So I'll be modding it out, obviously giving it a flux capacitor and everything else. But I just got that last week, so I wanted to put that in there, that I'm now the proud owner of a 1982 DMC DeLorean, which, it's actually a really cool car. A lot of weird things, quirks about it, because, it was designed kind of from the ground up. But the engine itself is like so underpowered. So it's like a 1980s, car when you're driving it. So it's really, really underpowered. So that's always fun. I might do a new engine swap in it or something like that down the road. We'll see. That's not why we're here to talk today. Why we're here to talk today is, organizations, regardless if you're small or large, struggle with different things. Whether that's, hey, we're predominantly moving to the cloud and understanding cloud technology, whether that's a hybrid model, whether that's understanding what our perimeter looks like, what understanding and educating our users. Information security tackles a lot of different areas, and it's an extremely complex program to implement, because you have to essentially interface with a lot of different businesses. And when you look at a lot of different organizations, one of the most complex programs within a security program is by far and hands down vulnerability management. Vulnerability management to me is one of the hardest programs to actually accomplish within an organization, because one, you're never done. I mean, I've never seen a company that didn't have any vulnerabilities. That just doesn't happen. But the second part about it is, when you start looking at, hey, maybe we have our operating systems down, okay, and maybe we're getting to third-party applications, okay. When you start getting into like the web application databases, middleware tier, things to that effect, ownership really starts to kind of go out the window on who's actually, in charge of maintaining and supporting that as we go along. And so, when you look at vulnerability management as an organization, we know that we're not going to be a perfect system, that there are going to be systems out there that we didn't know existed. There's going to be systems out there that are legacy. There's going to be systems out there that we can't patch because it'll impact the business too much. There are systems out there that we just haven't identified the exposures out there, whether it's a custom app, third-party app, software that we have in place. Regardless, there's a lot of complexities running technology within an organization. And technology is just expanding and increasing, right? We have a technology that gets added all the time. I'm sure everybody here knows of every single piece of technology that is implemented in every one of your organizations and continues to know that every single day in and day out. Usually doesn't happen that way, right? And so with technology progression, with our attack surfaces expanding, the mindset of 10 years ago was, hey, let's build a castle. Let's build this heavily fortified castle that, is got these, it's got a drawbridge, it's got archers, we got all this stuff that we can protect the inside of our castle with. But then, what we started realizing is, hey, now we have things like work from home. We have different architecture designs where our users are more mobile and remote in many cases. And we're leveraging more cloud infrastructure. So our castles are no longer there. And our attack surfaces have absolutely changed as technology has changed as well. And so when you start looking at kind of the current state of security, most organizations struggle to understand complex techniques. And when we talk about techniques, the term, the tactics, techniques, and procedures is commonly used all across the board. So TTPs, right? Most organizations are solely focusing on just the techniques and not understanding the tactics that adversaries go through and the procedures that they operate by. And this is kind of a shift that the industry continues to need to do, which is, hey, we know that vulnerability management isn't going to be perfect. We know that we're going to have some issues that we're not going to be able to address or that we didn't know existed, and that an attacker could potentially exploit those specific weaknesses. And so if we know that that's the case, traditionally, let's fly back 10 years ago, whenever an organization would get a penetration test done and they'd focus, on identifying what exposures they have so they can patch them, there would be less of a focus on what happened afterwards. So for example, let's just say, I popped a web application that had SQL injection on it. It gave me, command execution. And then from command execution, I was able to get remote code execution. And from remote code execution, I was able to, do defense evasion. And then from there, move laterally across the network until I got access to, a system that was a server that had a local admin on it that had a weak password. And then from there, I was able to move to another server. And then from there, I got domain admin. And from there, I was able to get access to mainframes. Okay. Let's just take that as an example, just a standard penetration test. A lot of the focus would have been the weak password from the admin account, would have been the SQL injection on the web application, and that probably would have been it from an attack surface perspective of what you would actually focus on. Now, the problem with that is that while you're addressing those specific actual holes that you have, which are things that you should do because they're risks, right? You need to prioritize those with personnel, timing, everything else, and address those and fix those. There was less of a focus on the actual attack patterns that occurred when that SQL injection attack was successful. So what happens when an attack is actually successful within an organization? So you compromise, you have access, now what happens? Okay, now we start looking at, defense evasion, persistence, lateral movement, all these post-exploitation scenarios all the way to exfiltration. And we start to look at those when we break those down in our environments. And are those things that we can either A, prevent, within our environment, disallow certain things from running consistently across our enterprise, or two, are the things that we can easily detect so that we can identify when an attacker's in our environment earlier on. And so, you see something like the MITRE ATT&CK framework come out. And what's interesting about MITRE ATT&CK is that I have rarely seen an organization actually implement the MITRE ATT&CK framework. They want to do it, but then they look at the techniques and sub-techniques and like, well, there's thousands of techniques here. I don't even know where to start, so I'm not going to even bother. And there's a problem with that, because when you look at what security operations centers today are designed to do, they're still very traditional in the sense of, information comes in from a log, that log triggers an alarm. They look at that alarm. Is that alarm a false positive or not? Close that alarm, move on to the next one, or escalate it to tier 2, tier 3 SOC analysts. So, we still have the traditional methods of security operations centers when we should really be looking at unusual behavior or things that are exhibiting behavior within our environment that we should be investigating from an attack surface perspective. It's what we consider threat hunting in many cases. So we're still very much a signature-driven industry, and I'll talk about that here in a second. Even if you have an EDR, an endpoint detection and response tool deployed in your environment, it's still very signature-driven. They have what they've built from known techniques into their tools, hopefully detecting stuff that you've seen. A great example is I just made a post on Twitter recently about it, and we had a customer that was running one of the brand names and EDR products, and had both the endpoint detection and endpoint protection on. And we had a red team engagement with them, and everybody wants a red team engagement. It's because it's like the most amazing thing. Everybody thinks it sounds amazing, so we got to do a red team because we can't do a traditional pen test because we're well above a penetration test, right? We got to do a red team. I would say probably 80 to 90% of people that we test from a red teaming perspective are not able to handle what an actual red team entails. And we have varying levels of sophistication. Like we can simulate, whatever specific adversary that are in their individual industry verticals, all the way to extremely mature 0-day routes, undocumented features, completely custom attack surface or attack chains, across their environment to some of the ones that can actually handle those. But what's interesting with this customer, and this is not a knock on the customer, I mean, great customer, they're amazing folks, is that they relied though very heavily off of technology. And when you rely heavily just off your technology, you're not improving your environment, understanding what that detection means in your environment or what the detections are within the EDR products that can be circumvented. You don't have a good monitoring detection program. By slapping an EDR does not make you secure in any way, shape, or form. It means you might have some more visibility. You might have some predefined things that maybe your antivirus didn't pick up, but you're still far, 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 far away from being able to withstand even an average level of sophistication towards your organization from a hacker's perspective. I mean, look at what the ransomware authors are doing. We'll talk about this as we go along, but the ransomware authors have gained a substantial amount of sophistication that are designed to get around your EDR products, that are designed to get around your antivirus products, and they're designed to inflict as much damage as possible. And so if you don't continuously focus on enhancing your monitoring detection capabilities, you're going to fail when it comes to protecting against specific attacks. And I'll show you some examples of this here in a little bit. And we also talk about threat intelligence in a sense where, threat intelligence is still to a lot of organizations domain names of already compromised infrastructure, not actual techniques broken down based off of industry vertical, based off of adversaries in your threat models that you can use actionably to build better detection criteria in your environment. So again, we have a lot of maturing to do here. And this isn't a blanket statement across the board. There are some organizations that are doing phenomenal at a lot of this, but most are still at a very basic level, which again, we'll talk about. But back to my story really quick around the penetration test, the company would only focus on SQL injection and that password, not on all the different steps that happen during that. How did I get those credentials in the first place? How did I move laterally from one workstation to the next workstation, or from one server to the next server? What are those specific types of techniques that I would leverage in an environment? And there's common ones across the board. Whether I'm doing local link multicast name resolution protocol or NetBIOS name services, or whether I'm doing printer spool attacks, abusing unconstrained delegation, common techniques that we'll see very much applied consistently across a lot of attacks. Those are things that you can quickly identify and work through your program without a lot of effort, a lot of change. And so if we look at our adversaries, 95% of companies are not in the nation state category when it comes to who their threat models are. So understanding your threat models is number one in any program that you want to build, because you need to understand what your offense is doing in order to get a better defense. So first and foremost, having and understanding who your adversaries are in play and what their sophistication level and capabilities are is number one, and starting to map those, right? So building out your threat models overall. Now, I talked about this earlier, but what's interesting about ransomware is that, I was completely wrong a couple of years ago. When I saw what happened with the Carter market, and the Carter market got tough for a lot of these that soon became the ransomware authors, the ransomware as a service type models. I thought ransomware was going to kind of die off. And the reason why I thought it would die off is because they were at such a low sophistication level that I really didn't see them progressing much. And I thought, yeah, they would get, people with phishing campaigns and small companies that didn't do any security whatsoever. But I thought that would eventually increase and raise as time went on. And so what ended up happening though is ransomware got a little bit more crazy as things go. Sorry, one second. Okay, sorry about that. So as ransomware started impacting very immature users and their sophistication levels were low, what the ransomware authors did, which was fairly unique was invest more in their infrastructure, their development, and getting more people. So it's kind of like a full-fledged business that was kind of happening. And when that started occurring, they started getting more and more sophisticated and going after small to medium-sized businesses. And now we just started seeing recently, over the past year and a half, them targeting large organizations and going with very different types of attacks. And I'll talk about attack customizations here in just a second. But I mean, they're using living off the land. They're using PowerShell exploitation. They're developing their own code. They're weaponizing their own tooling. They're leveraging open source resources and open source tools, offensive security tools. And so they're mixing together all of these different areas to have a recipe for success. And we just saw a couple of days ago, Universal Health Systems just had a massive data breach, or not data breach, but ransomware attack, shut down their hospitals, are turning people away, allegedly 4 deaths, apparently. Again, not confirmed on that one, so I don't want to start rumors there, just what was been reported. We saw Garmin recently, $15 million ransom. They're getting bigger and bolder with what they're doing, and their sophistication levels are not just, hey, we're going to send out this executable and this document, for you to go and download. It's going to go and download a binary wrapper, and then from there execute. It's changing quite a bit as things have gone along. So, and what's also interesting about this is that they're focusing less on the automation aspects of things, and they're doing more targeted attacks. Doing open source intelligence gathering, looking for specific patterns that they can go after, starting to target your organization infrastructure in a very customized approach. And then once they have access to a system, they start focusing on other ways that we can do post-exploitation scenarios and lateral movement across your environment, and continuously focus on that. So again, ways that they are getting better overall. And those are things that we don't typically look at in our specific threat models and what we're building from a detection standpoint. So in today's industry, if you customize an attack in any way, shape, or form, you can pretty much get around most detections today. That one customer that I was talking about that we did the red team engagement with, they had one of the top EDR products out there, both in protection and detection mode, and they didn't see us for over a month. We had nothing that flagged, not once, in their entire infrastructure and environment. And they were shocked because they're like, well, our EDR product should have picked this specific thing up. And we're like, yeah, well, I mean, if we customize our attacks, your EDR is not going to see it. You have to focus on your environment and look for unusual behavior in your environment to get better at actual detections. So let's take an example of getting around detections today. And obviously this is Windows Defender. It could be with any product. They're all very similar in nature to how they work, even if it's an EDR product or things to that effect. And in this case, we're going to call it RegistryR32. Now, RegistryR32 is one of the most abused living off the land binaries and scripts that's out there. A lot of ransomware will use it, as a downloader and execute a way to execute scriptlet objects. But if you're not familiar with living off the land, just a really quick history lesson on some of this. So primarily, the method for exploitation was still executables and binaries, which are still heavily used today because a lot of people don't have good control over unsigned code being executed in their systems. And then things kind of migrated to PowerShell. And PowerShell has been a major attack surface for the longest time. And then you look at what's called living off the land. And this isn't specific to Windows. This also very much applies to OS X and Linux as well. And these are applications that are built in by the operating system or third parties. They're code signed, and by the specific producer of that code, to verify the integrity of the code itself. And they have additional functionality in them that allow for certain things to happen, like remote code execution or things to that effect. In this specific case, on RegistryR32, you can go and download a document or anything you want to. It contains whatever it wants. But inside of it, if you have what's called a scriptlet object, which is a scripting language that you can use for essentially compromising the system if you want to, you can call that specific scriptlet object DLL and have it parse that and automatically execute. Now, since this is actively used quite frequently, and Microsoft, instead of reducing its attack surface and removing that functionality out, they decided to write, a Windows Defender signature. Now, Windows Defender is straight up a signature-based antivirus product. There is no machine learning or artificial intelligence. I don't care what their marketing says about it. It is straight up a signature-based antivirus product. There is no behavior in it whatsoever. And it's extremely trivial to get around. Again, signature-based detections, even with things like with the anti-malware scan interface or AMSI, which was incorporated in Windows 10, AMSI is dead. It is not a security boundary. It is not a way to protect you in any way, shape, or form. It is a commodity way of scanning scripting languages. It is so far broken from a preventative standpoint that it's not even funny. So, you know, from that side, don't even worry about AMSI from an attacker standpoint. We can disable it. You know, we can tell it not to scan. You know, there's two function types: AMSI scan string and AMSI scan buffer. There's a million of different ways to get around AMSI, so it doesn't even touch your code in the first place. You don't even have to worry about obfuscating your code. You can just shut off AMSI in the first place, and Windows Defender will never scan in the first place. So it is broke. You know, 10 ways to Sunday, because it runs in under the context of the user land. AMSI.dll gets injected into a process space that you control as that regular user, can shut it down in any way, shape, or form. But anyways, in this specific case, we see here that Windows Defender is blocking this specific command from executing. So it's going out to this website, downloading this text document, and then what it's trying to accomplish is just running calc.exe as an example. So as an attacker, is there a way for us to manipulate or modify this code in some way, shape, or form to gain remote code execution? So the answer to that is yes. If we remove what the signature is for Windows Defender, and instead of going out to the website and downloading, we can just use another application within Windows to go and download our text file, that test.txt. In this case, you can use BitsAdmin, you can use Excel, new versions of Windows have curl. There's a million different ways to go and download a file off of, you know, from the command line side of the house. And in this case, you know, BitsAdmin goes out to the internet, is downloading test.txt, and then from there we call registrar32 without going out to the internet, and then running our scripted logic, which completely circumvents the Defender signature for this specific case here. Again, very, very broke, very easy to get around as an attacker's perspective. And that's very much how EDR products work as well. They're looking for very specific types of attacks, because they have to write signatures for entire enterprises and organizations, so that when you don't turn the product on, you don't have 600,000, you know, false positives in your environment. So they're very pruned type of detections in those environments. And so, you know, modifying it and changing it in some way, shape, or form completely blocks that, completely evades those detection criteria they have in place. Here's another example I'll show you here with using Magic Unicorn. And so Magic Unicorn is a PowerShell exploitation framework that I wrote. And what it does is it creates a one-liner essentially for you to go and download or to execute shellcode directly into memory through PowerShell. And Windows Defender loves my tool. They love writing signatures for it. You know, I'll come out with a new version, they'll write signatures. It's the most ridiculous thing ever, because a funny story with this, I didn't mean to do that, but a really quick funny story about this one is I wrote two tools. One was called Trevor C2, which is a command and control framework that does the exact same thing. It has a C# module, a PowerShell module, a C++ module that's cross-compatible to Linux, OS X, and Windows. And when I wrote Unicorn, they'll write new signatures all the time, but they still haven't written anything for Trevor. So you can just download Trevor, execute that, have it load, you know, whatever you want to, shellcode into memory, and it doesn't get detected because, you know, they only focus on Unicorn. So if your tool is popular and you know, they decide they want to write tools for, they assign essentially resources to write signatures when new versions are out, but they don't focus on anything else. So it's ridiculous. It's a cat and mouse game, but in this specific case, it's so easy to get around. So I'm gonna go ahead and open this generated code that we just did. And this is our obfuscated code. It's just base64 encoded, so that we can get around execution restriction policies. And then we're gonna decode it so that we can take a look at the code through Windows 10. Now, what we're gonna see here is we're gonna see AMSI, the anti-malware scan interface, actually scan my code. Now, really quick here, what's gonna happen just behind the scenes within Windows internals is that we're gonna copy this code, we're gonna move it over to the PowerShell interpreter, the PowerShell ISE. And when we hit play, what's going to happen is there's a hook point in when my code's about to execute, where AMSI.dll is injected, and there's going to be an AMSI scan string or AMSI scan buffer. In this specific case, it's going to be AMSI scan string. It's going to scan that code to look for any predefined signatures that has been written through what's called an AMSI provider. And an AMSI provider is going to be, in this case, specifically Windows Defender. So AMSI is going to submit to the AMSI provider the string that I am trying to execute on that system itself. And so it's going to come back saying, hey, antivirus detected this because they wrote a signature. But we'll see how easy it is to get around that signature in the first place here. So we'll go ahead and copy this. And then we'll move it over to the other side. And then we're going to hit play. We're going to create a listener first so that we can catch the shell when we hit it. But we hit play. Notice here it says the script contains malicious content has been blocked. So what we're going to do is I'm going to try to chunk this up a little bit to figure out what part's actually getting detected. So I'm just going to delete this last line here, going to cut it out, hit play, and notice we don't get that same error message before it, which means that there's a signature right in this specific line here that's getting caught. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to chunk this line up to say A equals, and we're going to take the second part of the code, which is invoke expression, and we're just going to substitute it in for a variable A, and then we're going to hit play again. And we completely get around the detection for that specific area. So you just got to kind of play with it, right? I have an automated tool that automatically goes through and submits on behalf of AMSI scan string to tell whether or not my code is actually being detected by a specific piece. And it chunks it up into places. It knows the interpretive language of PowerShell. And it chunks it up into a place to find exactly where that signature is being flagged at. And then it'll either A, if it knows how to, it automatically rewrite it for me with obfuscation, and then submit it again to see if it gets past it. Or B, it'll tell me exactly where I need to go in order to rewrite my code to get around it. So it just takes a couple of seconds to get around whenever they release a new signature for the code itself. So, trivial to get around from a attack surface perspective. So most organizations rely heavily off of their products and tooling, whether it's an EDR, whether it's a next-gen firewall, whether it's their monitoring and detection from a SIM perspective. But most organizations don't enhance their security products as they implement. I'm not saying having an EDR is bad or having a SIM is bad. Those are all great things. You want visibility into your infrastructure. But relying upon them to be your sole front of the detection is a really critical area that most organizations fail at because it's so easy to get around these specific products. And so you look at things like EDR products, right? We as attackers going into infrastructure know, what your EDR product flags and doesn't flag on. We're not stupid. We test this out well ahead of time. And I think it was Adam just recently Hexacon. Sorry if I butchered the name. But he recently said, if any of those products were public in nature where you could download free trials, they would be completely destroyed within 2 or 3 weeks, just based on how big the gaps are within their environment. And that's 100% true. I mean, you couldn't have said it any better. These products are, the reason why they have been somewhat effective, and what Hexacorn was saying, on that specific area is that, it's because they're not widely public to security researchers or attackers. So you have to figure out a way of getting them to test them out. But that's the only thing, is just kind of tripping on landmines and figuring things out versus actually building detection criteria in your overall environment. So again, most organizations are still at very much a basic level. And some are further along than others, which is a great thing. Those are folks that focus on understanding what attackers are doing. And I'll get into that in just a second. So that's the main problem, right? The problem is that we don't look at what our adversaries are doing. We don't look at what our threat models are, and we don't prioritize our security program to incorporate those specific input items to build our security program in the first place. Our strategies are all focused on the wrong areas. Our strategies are focused on all of the things that we hypothetically want to do from a strategic roadmap perspective over the next 3 years. We want to implement, network access control. We want to resegment our network. Those are all great things to aspire to, 100%. You shouldn't not do that. But it's going to take time and effort. So how do you keep your security program that's at a basic level in a way that you can minimize the damage towards your organization until you can get all of those things in place? And so it's that balancing act of having the visibility and detection and making sure that you can focus on your strategy at the same time. And that really comes down to leveraging red. When we talk about leveraging red, when we talk about that specific component there, it's understanding what red is doing, understanding what your adversaries are doing, right? And I said that a lot, but most people don't look at that. They don't look at specific APT groups or, FinSec specific type, groups that are focusing on their specific industry vertical. We look very specifically off of, well, hey, we just got this new feed in. We're going to throw this feed into our tool automatically, and hopefully it detects, a specific hash or, a specific command and control that's out there today. We're going to try to automate as much as possible so that, we don't have to worry about it. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of hard work and effort. And MITRE ATT&CK was a great example of a good starting point, because with MITRE ATT&CK, you don't have to do all of the thousands of techniques. You can focus on the specific adversary groups that are in your industry vertical, break down those tactics and procedures, and start to build good detections. Now, let's just go back a second really quick to before. Is a good detection for this specific attack looking for regsvr32 with a /I and an HTTP in it, i.e. what Windows Defender is doing? The answer to that is no, that is not a good detection because we can get around it. But what would be a good detection for regsvr32? How about looking at your entire environment and seeing if you ever have seen a process creation for regsvr32 in your environment from a regular user? I guarantee you the answer to that is no. So instead of focusing on a command line argument, why not focus on regsvr32 ever being executed in the first place, or regsvr32 ever going out to the internet in the first place? regsvr32 with network communications. That is a good detection. A bad detection is what we see here because we have to baseline environments. And again, EDR products and antivirus products focus very heavily on multitude of organizations and corporations as they go through. We don't have a good detection if we just focus solely on that. And the way that you can definitely approach this and start to build it down is by leveraging purple teams, or just having somebody that understands offense and working on building the detections based off of that. And if you look at something like MITRE ATT&CK, there's a blog that we did recently on the top 10 most used MITRE attacks that are attack techniques that are out there today. That's a great starting point. Also going through ones that you know that you've heard of before because it's probably relevant to your environment, and then start taking adversaries and start prioritizing them. Hey, these are the top 50 that we want to implement in our organization. That's a great step of the top 50 attack techniques that are out there and ways that we can detect them in our environment and getting better with those detections, right? Starting to whittle away that way makes a big difference in what you're trying to accomplish in your monitoring detection program. And it really comes down to, we have a lack of detection in organizations. I can't tell you how many times, I go into an organization, as long as I don't trigger their signature-based detection, I'm usually fine. Or even if I do, I did a talk last year at Wild West Hacking Fest where I started messing with security analysts, SOC analysts, and knowing that my attack was going to be detected. How do I tell a different story to the security operations center that I'm going after? And the way that I did that was I would take my malicious code that would get picked up by an EDR product or antivirus or whatever it ends up being, not antivirus specifically, but their monitoring detection program, and would definitely send an alarm to a SOC analyst, and I'd wrap it in a huge, massive script. So like, for example, let's just say I was using Magic Unicorn that does shellcode injection directly into memory through the PowerShell process. Obviously malicious if you saw obfuscated code coming across your screen. What I did is I took a large Microsoft script, PowerShell script, and I tucked my malicious PowerShell code halfway through that script. And guess what happened? Yep, got flagged as a false positive, right? Because they're not going to go through thousands of lines of PowerShell code. They're like, well, this looks like a good script. And a lot of times what I'll even do from an attacker's perspective is I'll do OSINT on LinkedIn and find like server admins or people within their own organization. And I'll put like comment code in there from that specific person that actually works at that company, saying, hey, this is a script that I'm using for blah, blah, blah. If you need any help, just email me, and I'll put the email address in there. So if a SOC analyst sees it, they're like, oh, this is Bob. I know Bob. I work with Bob every day. He's just using the script to do some stuff. Cool, we're all set. I'm just going to mark this as a false positive. So we have even larger challenges there. I'm not going to go into that part because that's the human piece of it. But the piece that we're lacking is the priority and the strategy around that, and really having a good understanding around offense and what your offense is doing makes a good defense. Now I put the Cleveland Browns in here because I'm from Cleveland. It's been an interesting season each and every year, but hey, we're up 2-1 right now, so that's a good thing. We actually have more victories. I think it's the first time we've had 2 consecutive victories since like 7 years ago or something like that, which has never happened. We had a perfect season one year where we lost every single game the whole season. So we, maybe using this as a reference isn't a good understanding because they can't figure out offense or defense. But sports aside, having a good understanding around what your offense is doing helps you build that better defense. And that collaboration approach of really working back and forth definitely makes a big difference overall. When we talk about threat models, right? And I've mentioned this a number of different times, but if you're not prioritizing your detections and how you're looking at maturing your SOC, what has happened is that what should be happening from a cyclical effect from a security operations center perspective is that you have your SOC analysts, and those SOC analysts should be less focused on the day in and day out alarms. And I don't think you should remove the ability for that, but they should be focusing on more of that, what we call the long tail, if you're familiar with the long tail concept, where you have your high volume stuff that's up here. And then as you start to get down more and look at the unusual things that are happening in the tail of an attack, those are the unusual indicators that are things that we should definitely focus in there. So all of those things are pieces that we need to focus on from an attack surface perspective and start to build our detections around there. Now, at the same time, you should have proactive people looking through your data, looking through your logs, trying to understand what's actually happening to build all of those out. And the cyclical effect starts to occur as you start to build those in and start testing it from a purple teaming perspective or more of an offensive capabilities perspective and enhancing your detection. So again, continual improvement of your security operations center as you go along. When you talk about prioritization, we have two strategies, right? You want to have your long-term strategy of building out your security program, your strategic portions, whether that's network segmentation, patch management, vulnerability management, et cetera. You also want to have that stopgap of things that are coming out, new attacks that are coming out, things that are being actively exploited in your environment, being able to have that stopgap to reduce that dwell time that an attacker has in your environment. Some basics that work well in the preventative side, disallowing unsigned executables within user profile directories, things like constrained language mode within PowerShell, going to PowerShell version 6 and disallowing PowerShell version 2. Sysmon, I'm a huge fan of, using kernel level event log tracing for Windows, which is a free tool from Mark Rusenovich's team over at Microsoft. Great configurable option, and Olaf Hardong has added Sysmon Modular, which allows you to get a pretty extensive amount of coverage with the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Just enabling your Windows firewall will stop lateral movement internally, especially if those firewalls can't communicate with one another. You can't move from one system to the next. That's a great thing. You have to have endpoint logs today. That's a must. If you're not doing that, you're really far behind. Not just north to south traffic, but also east to west, improving on your visibility, and focusing on threat hunting and what specific attackers are doing. And I just want to repeat one more time before I close it off and open up to some questions here. But you have to baseline your environment and detect off of that, right? Understanding behavior in your environment, and that's going to shore up false positives. Like a good example is a good detection off of PowerShell isn't looking for encoded command or kernel32.dll or invoke expression. That's going to get you some high commodity stuff, but looking for whenever PowerShell is communicating out to the internet. Now, that's going to be a false positive nightmare at first, because you're going to have to baseline and look for deviations of those baselines as you go along. But as you start to whittle those through, you start to see less and less and less of those. And now you can start to actually look for unusual activity in your environment originating in the first place. Here's a blog post that we did. If you just go look up TrustedSec, top 10 MITRE ATT&CK techniques, you can find the specific top 10s there for you. Happy to share the link or the presentation afterwards. I think I linked them all in the section in the latter stages of the presentation. But closing up here, I want to thank everybody for CornCon from having me. And for putting on this awesome conference. When it comes to what we deal with today, we still cannot rely off of technology to automate us. We have to focus on people first, educating people, educating our environment so that we can look for unusual behavior as things going on. That comes from understanding what attackers are doing, helping prioritize that, and working through that within your own environment. I have some other resources here. You can go and download just some good reading material down the road. I'll be happy to send these slides out to anybody that wants it. Hit me up on Twitter or whatnot. But thank you again very much for having me, and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, thank you so much. Looks like we do have one question. Let me just pull it up here at least. It comes from Nate. Would you estimate that all of the major offensive innovations come from the nation-state orgs? And if so, would a Cyber Geneva Convention make the cyber world a safer place?
I don't think a lot of the innovation comes from a lot of the nation states. You look at some of the attacks that are coming out from ransomware groups. They're highly sophisticated, and a lot of innovation coming from there. There was one recently where it was Emotet that would automatically scan your wireless infrastructure to try to piggyback and expand its network communications and services too. So, a lot of I would say a lot of the innovation comes from the research industry as far as new techniques that are happening out there to try to enhance and improve security overall for a lot of them. But nation states definitely are a major concern, because as soon as those get discovered, there's usually some pretty awesome secret sauce in there that's actually happening as it's going along. So, I think it's all over the place where a lot of this is coming out from. It's there's nation states, there's organized crime groups, there's researchers, this whole industry is exploding because technology is exploding so fast. So I'm not sure if something like that would help or not, but I think a consortium of understanding the implications around attack surfaces and being able to build your defenses makes a big deal.
Great. And then there is one more. Will you be in the Concord Discord answering questions later?
Unfortunately, I don't have time to hang out in the Discord, but maybe I can drop by a little bit later tonight on it. My kids have basketball practice here a little bit later, so apologize for that, but won't be able to make that. But thank you so much. Yeah.
No worries. Thank you, Dave. That was all.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye. Oh, sorry, Drummel. You came in before you were in the chat. All right. We're going to be back at 1:15 with Sean Anderson, Executive Security Advisor at Microsoft, doing what should we trust? Should we trust but verify, or trust nothing and verify everything? All right. See you guys soon.